Okay, imagine this scenario. A huge revelation is promised, everyone's waiting, and then poof, it vanishes, just gone. That's basically the story we're digging into today. The whole Epstein list narrative, how it blew up, and then how it just sort of fell apart. And our mission here isn't just to recount the events from our source material, the sequence of what happened. It's really about what this whole thing tells us about information, about trust, and about political strategy today. We're looking at an article that really tries to untangle this whole knot.
Right. And hopefully this deep dive helps you, our listener, get a quick handle on who the key players were, how things shifted so fast, and maybe more importantly, the bigger lessons here for understanding, well, political movements in this age of incredibly fast information flow. Keep an ear out for what really jumps out at you as we go through it.
So let's rewind a bit. This really kicks off with Donald Trump's strategy, building through the 2024 campaign and right into his term. The promise, the specific promise to reveal this Epstein client list, it became this like electrifying centerpiece of his populist message. Yeah, it wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. It feels very calculated, right? Aimed squarely at firing up the MAGA base. It tapped into these really deep-seated suspicions about corrupt elites, the existence of a protective deep state, that hidden power structure idea.
Exactly.
And Trump kept saying repeatedly that he'd name names, big names, particularly Democrats, establishment figures, supposedly tied into Jeffrey Epstein's network. The promise felt really concrete. Trump would give them the truth the elites were trying to bury.
And what's fascinating there is how effectively that validated this core belief among his followers, the idea that the whole system is rigged. And, only a disruptor, an outsider like Trump could actually deliver accountability.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, how do these narratives get so powerful, even before there's any hard evidence presented?
That's a great question. And its power wasn't just from Trump himself. It was amplified massively by this whole chorus of MAGA influencers and right-wing media figures. The source mentions people like Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, the Hodge twins, Alex Jones, Laura Loomer.
The usual suspects in that sphere.
Right. And they hammered on this Epstein list constantly. It was a recurring theme on their shows, on social media. They were really, fanning the flames, building that anticipation. And it wasn't just about sparking outrage. It also reinforced Trump's image, right, as this fearless truth teller who wasn't afraid of anyone.
That's such a key point. Because that constant drumbeat, that amplification, it landed perfectly with a base that was already, let's say, primed to distrust mainstream sources, mainstream institutions. So the Epstein list became more than just a list. It became a symbol of this bigger fight against what they saw as, well, elite impunity, elite corruption. It's actually quite something, how effectively you can build and sustain a narrative with that kind of aligned media messaging.
And that anticipation, that expectation, it really hit a fever pitch, didn't it? In February 2025, that's when Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, goes on Fox News. And she says it point blank, unequivocal terms, the source says. She had the Epstein client list, and it was sitting on my desk.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, that statement just electrified Trump's base. It spread like wildfire across conservative media. People thought, okay, finally, it's happening. It felt like, concrete proof the administration is actually delivering on this huge promise of transparency, of accountability.
You could almost feel it, right? That palpable sense of expectation. So many people in that movement must have felt they were right there on the cusp of seeing this massive historic reckoning unfold. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it really underscores the incredible impact just one statement from someone seen as an authority figure can have on a base that's already highly engaged. It validates their whole worldview in that moment.
But then, the whiplash. Early July comes around, and everything just flips. Completely. The Department of Justice, the FBI, they put out an official memo, and it says, flat out, no such client list exists.
Just gone.
Gone. And the memo even doubles down, reaffirming Epstein died by suicide back in 2019, and there was no credible evidence of blackmail, no evidence of these uncharged third parties everyone expected to be named.
Oof.
Yeah. Imagine the shockwaves in the MAGA base. People had invested years in this hope, this belief, the reaction. It was immediate and it was intense. Influencers who'd been pushing this for so long suddenly turned on Bondi. Some were demanding she be fired, accusing her of betrayal. The Hodge twins, for instance, they publicly called for her to be removed. Just pure outrage.
And that sense of betrayal, you could almost taste it. It wasn't just aimed at Bondi either. It spread fast. Figures like Elon Musk, Laura Loomer, Tim Pool, Alex Jones, they jumped in, accusing Bondi, accusing the DOJ of basically orchestrating a cover-up. protecting powerful people.
Right.
And this, interestingly, exposed some really deep rifts within that world. You saw this public clash mentioned between Bondi and the FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, arguing about how the investigation was handled, the lack of transparency or perceived lack. It's really striking how quickly that trust can just evaporate when these foundational claims that were championed so hard, are suddenly knocked down by official sources.
So facing this firestorm, Trump had to step in, right? Damage control time. He goes onto Truth Social, defends Bondi, calls her work fantastic, tells his followers basically stop attacking her.
Trying to calm things down.
Exactly. He tried to frame the whole thing as, a distraction, said they needed to focus on other things, disaster response, the economy. He warned that getting bogged down in the Epstein stuff risked sabotaging the progress they were making.
The classic pivot.
But, despite those efforts, the trust deficit was real. You could feel it. Reports started coming out, Axios, NPR, saying many influencers, many supporters just felt deeply let down. There was this huge disconnect between what Bondi had promised so clearly and what the DOJ was now saying. Some accused Trump himself of deflecting, of silencing legitimate questions. Others, though, were calling for everyone to just unify and move on.
And that really highlights the challenge, doesn't it? For the movement, I mean, if you step back and look at it, it just shows how incredibly difficult it is to manage expectations, especially when you make these huge promises that, well, aren't delivered.
Yeah.
Even within a really loyal base, a base conditioned to believe a certain narrative, it puts leadership in a tough spot.
Absolutely. So let's zoom out. What are the broader implications here? This whole episode, it seems to say a lot about the dynamics of populist politics, about using these sometimes conspiratorial narratives to mobilize people. Trump's whole message leans so heavily on that distrust of elites, the promise of revealing hidden truths.
Right, that was the core appeal for many.
But then, the sudden collapse of this huge promise, the Epstein list thing, it really exposed the risks in that strategy, didn't it?
Yeah.
When a foundational claim just gets disproven, the disillusionment that follows can actually fracture even your most loyal supporters.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like you said earlier, about the base itself.
Yeah.
Why did some react with such fury, demanding answers, while others seemed okay to just move past it or even defend the leadership? What does that tell us about the different types, maybe, of loyalty within that movement?
That's a really critical point to unpack, because you do see this spectrum, right? You've got the, let's say, uncritical believers who accept almost anything. Then you have maybe more pragmatic loyalists willing to overlook certain things if the larger goal seems intact. And then, as we saw here, you have these increasingly vocal skeptics, people who felt genuinely misled. And this episode, it really did underscore the fragility of trust in movements that kind of depend on constantly churning out these sensational revelations to keep the energy up, to keep cohesion. So, the big question that hangs in the air is, could this be a subtle but maybe significant turning point in how populist politics works in America?
Interesting thought.
Because that reliance on claims that turn out to be unverified and then the failure to deliver, it absolutely created a crisis of confidence for some. And there's a real risk there, a further erosion of that MAGA enthusiasm, that deference to leadership, especially among followers who are actually hungry for real accountability, for substantive results, not just promises.
So ultimately, you could say this whole saga kind of exposed the structural weaknesses, maybe, of a movement that has perhaps often put spectacle ahead of substance. It definitely raises questions about how sustainable that kind of conspiracy-driven mobilization is in the long run.
I think that's fair. Trump's ability, going forward, to keep that base energized might really depend on whether he can pivot effectively. Pivot to new themes, yes, but also deliver tangible wins, actual victories, rather than just relying on the allure of the next big conspiracy theory. His credibility, while still obviously strong with a large segment, is now being questioned. And not just by opponents, but by some core supporters who genuinely feel they were misled this time.
Right.
And if those followers start demanding more substance, less spectacle, well, that could fundamentally challenge the effectiveness of the whole conspiracy messaging playbook. It might force a strategic shift towards, actual concrete policy achievements.
Well, that was quite a journey through a really fascinating and kind of messy case study in political strategy, public trust, and narrative collapse.
It really was.
Yeah.
And for you listening, I think the core things to take away are about those dynamics, how narratives get built up, how they get amplified, how they get tested against reality, and also the absolutely critical role of, well, information verification or the lack thereof within these kinds of populist movements. What's really revealing, I think, is seeing the vulnerabilities that pop up when the promises just don't match the reality.
Yeah. So maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on. In this era we're in, just saturated with information, often filled with distrust, how does anyone tell the difference between a genuine push for accountability and just, well, the alluring promise of hidden truths that might never actually materialize? Something to think about.